Hi there and welcome back to my channel. This is Gina from McGuire and I'm thankful that you've stopped by. Today I am doing a glitter stenciling technique. Now I did this technique a long time ago and I'll link to that video here, and it is one of the coolest techniques. It's so much fun to do. I'm going to show you a few different variations of doing this technique. And for those of you who don't like glitter, don't worry, I share some other tips about using background dyes creatively throughout this video. Now I feel like I should address the glitter situation. So some people no longer like glitter because of environmental issues. There are some people who are still okay with using it, and there are biodegradable glitters available now. Well, what I decided was to use up the glitter I have, and that's what I'm using in today's video. Now I know some people also don't like glitter because it rubs off and leaves a mess and doesn't really stay on the card. Well, this technique, the glitter does stay put, so I love that. And I will also share some tips for keeping the mess contained as you create. Now the glitter that I'm using today I've had for a very long time, and I've used many times in the past. This is Elizabeth Craft's Silk Ultra Fine Glitter. Now you could use any glitter for this technique, but I think the finer the better, and this ultrafine glitter is perfect. If you are interested in the particular colors that I use in today's video, I will have them listed with each card over on my blog, which I'll have a link to below. Now along with the glitter, you also need a strong double-sided adhesive. The one that I've been using lately is called Diecut'N Bond from Couture Creations. This comes on a big roll, and I just put a piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock on it and trim off the excess. In fact, you can do a bunch of these at once. I've used many other double-sided adhesives in the past, and they all work great. I just recommend a thicker one. So any kind of thicker double-sided adhesive would work. If you just have double-sided adhesive tape, like that comes on a thin roll or narrow roll, you can put rows of that together to cover the entire cardstock if you prefer. But if you watch my videos, you know that I have used this roll of Diecut'N Bond many times, and it's the one that I've been reaching for the most. After I've trimmed the pieces down, I have a piece of cardstock with double-sided adhesive on one side, and I use my bone folder just to make sure that it is adhered nicely. Okay, now it's time to do our technique. Let's start with the background on this card. For this one, I'm using the new Pretty Pink Posh Christmas background stencil. Any stencils will work for this, but I really like how intricate this one is, and it works great in demonstrating how well this technique works. So I have one piece of cardstock with the double-sided adhesive, and I'll remove the release paper from it, so the adhesive is exposed and facing up towards the camera. I'm just going to take the stencil, which has nothing on it, and lay it right into that adhesive. Don't worry, it'll come off later. And then I use the release paper to just run over the stencil to press the stencil into the adhesive. Now I'm going to add my first color of glitter. I like to do this over a coffee filter. It's a great way to capture the glitter and then easily funnel it back into the bottle. Now when you're adding the glitter to your piece, you want to try to keep the stencil and the paper flat when you pour it on and then tilt it off. That allows the glitter to really fill in all of the spaces. Now once you have it on there, I just take my finger and rub that glitter into the adhesive. So I'm just kind of pressing it in there. You can actually skip the step, which I'll show you later, but at this point I thought it was still needed. Once I'm done, I'm going to remove the excess glitter with a Swiffer dusting cloth, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. You could also use a dry cloth for this. You just want to capture as much glitter as you can and remove it. Okay, so now I'm going to peel the stencil away, and believe it or not, it comes off just fine. You just want to kind of pull from the different angles so that you don't rip the stencil, but I tell you, they're strong, and I haven't had any problems with it. So now that white area is actually exposed adhesive. So I'm going to pour my second color of glitter on top. And it'll look like it's going to stick everywhere, but don't worry, it'll come off. And what's happening is we're filling in that pattern with this dark blue glitter. I find this works best if you have a high contrast between the two colors. Okay, once I'm done, I'm just going to take another Swiffer dusting cloth. You can reuse these many times, and rub back and forth across it. This will remove any of the extra adhesive. And what happens is the dark blue will only end up where that exposed adhesive is. And now it's time to really press all that glitter into the adhesive. I use the end of my bone folder and just rub across the surface. You can also use your finger to burnish this. Now this allows the glitter to really get into that adhesive so it doesn't rub off, and you can see the beautiful shine. This is something that works particularly well with that Elizabeth's Crafts silk microfine glitter, and look at that beautiful background. Absolutely gorgeous. Now I've done this with other glitters and it does work fine. I just think the shine of this particular one is really special. So let's do a few more glitter stenciled backgrounds before we turn them into cards. This next one really shows the technique well because we have a dark pink glitter with a light green. I use the Pretty Pink Posh Whimsical Christmas Stencil, which is another one that has a lot of detail. I'm again starting with my white cardstock, removing the release paper that the double-sided adhesive has, and then we'll lay our clean stencil right on top of that. I'll use the release paper to allow me to press my fingers on this. I don't want to get my fingers in the exposed adhesive, and it just presses it into place. Now I'm adding a dark pink glitter, and you'll see I kind of hold it flat while I add the glitter just to make sure I get into all of the areas. Once I tap off the excess, I'm going to take my Swiffer dusting cloth and wipe across the surface. Now, Swiffer dusting cloths are something that I use in my craft room a lot because it's excellent for cleaning up embossing powder and glitter, and it controls the mess big time. So I highly recommend trying those or any kind of dusting cloth that you may have. I actually cut my Swiffer dusting cloths into smaller pieces, and that's what I'm using here. So a little goes a long way. Okay, so now we can go ahead and remove the stencil, and it's time to add our second color, which is going to be a light green. So as I do this, you can see that the green looks like it's going to stick on top of the pink a little bit, but don't worry, when we add that dusting cloth on top, it removes all the excess. And then we can either use our bone folder or our finger to really press all of that glitter in place, and you can see how shiny it is. It's really hard to capture the amount of shine in this, especially in photos, but I think here in the video you can get a feel for it. Okay, let's do another example. This time I have a different style of stencil. It's not as intricate, and I again am using a darker glitter alongside a lighter. This is the Pretty Pink Posh Snowflakes stencil, which I think would be great with a glitter gel also, or texture paste over it, but today we're doing the glitter with stencil. So again, I have some white cardstock with the double-sided adhesive. I'm laying my stencil right on top of it, and then I'll start with a dark teal colored glitter. Make sure I pour that generously on top and then tap away the excess. I use my dry Swiffer cloth to wipe away the excess glitter. And then I can carefully peel off the stencil. You'll see you're no problem doing this at all. Even though the stencil has a lot more solid area, I was still able to do it. And this time I'm adding a light silver glitter. So now we'll have a silver background with the bold blue snowflakes. I wipe off the excess glitter with my Swiffer dusting cloth. And then I use my bone folder to really press that glitter in place so none of it rubs off. And check out that beautiful sparkly background that we have. Now I have one more stencil glitter background that I want to share with you. Then I have a different type of background to show you. Now this one here uses the Pretty Pink Posh Leaves and Berries stencil, which I think works really great for this technique. Once again, I have placed my stencil onto the double-sided adhesive, and now I'm adding some green glitter right on top of the stencil, knocking the excess off into a coffee filter, and then I will use the cloth to remove the excess glitter laying on top. Okay, now I can carefully peel away the stencil, and trust me, I've never harmed a stencil in doing this technique. You just want to pull it off carefully as you see me do here. Okay, so now I'm going to add light gold glitter on top of this. And it'll look like we covered up a lot of our green, but once you use your cloth to remove the excess and then press all that glitter into the adhesive, you end up with a perfectly clean, shiny background. The finer the glitter you use, the better the results will be. Okay, so I wanted to also show you how you could use this technique with a background die. I had this background die from Pretty Pink Posh and I really liked it. I'll use it a few times in this video and thought it would be fun to use it for this glitter technique. So we're actually going to create our own stencil from this die. So I saved some of the release paper from that double-sided adhesive that I've been using throughout this video, and I'm actually going to die cut the release paper. It'll be super thin, but it worked out just fine. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6, but any die cut machine would work with this die. Okay, now we have this really thin stencil that we've created. I'm just going to remove all the extra bits and pieces until we just have the die cut itself. Now I have a piece of cardstock with the double-sided adhesive, and I'm carefully positioning the release paper die cut right onto the adhesive. The reason I'm using the release paper for this die cut is I know that it'll stay on the adhesive long enough for me to put the glitter on top, but then it'll come off nicely when I'm ready to remove it and add the second glitter. So once I have it in place, I'll just press it down with yet another piece of release paper. You could have used any other kind of clear packaging or thin plastic to die cut to create your own stencil, but this worked just well and it saved it from going to waste. Okay, so now on top of this, I'll add my first glitter, and this is just a silver. Once I have that on, I will use my cloth to remove the excess, and then we can remove our stencil that we created and add our second color. And because we made this from the release paper, it comes off nicely. Now for this second color, I'm using green, and I'm really just putting around the outside edge where we have that adhesive exposed. So this shows you that you can also use your dies to create these glitter backgrounds, and it's a beautiful smooth background in the end. Okay, so now let's use these backgrounds to create our cards, and I have some ideas to share with you on using background dies. Now this is the teal and blue background that we created earlier, and I'm using that same background die to create a frame to go around it. I die cut it 3 times from white cardstock, and I'm using Gina Connect adhesive to glue them together for a stacked look. I'm using heavyweight 110-pound cardstock for this, but you could use lighter weight if you want and just add more layers. I really like to have dimension on my die cuts. Here's the glittered background, and I've trimmed it down to 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm adding it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I then am going to use my double-sided tape to add the frame right on top of it. I just decided to use double-sided tape so I wouldn't have to wait for it to dry on top of that glitter, and I knew this would hold nicely. So now I'll go ahead and add the frame to the card, and the outside dimension of the frame is 4 1/4 by 5.5, so it'll match perfectly. Once I was done with this, I added a stacked Hello die cut to the center. The Hello die cut is from the Pretty Pink Posh Hello Friend die set. It's got the word hello and friend, and I like to use them together and separately. I also added some pink gemstones around the border and then a few around the word hello. If I did this card again, I probably wouldn't put the ones around the hello and would really just stick with the ones on the outside edge. Because that background is so sparkly and bold, I thought it was best to just keep with clean white die cuts and just keep it very simple. Okay, let's do our next example. This uses part of the Leaves and Berries glitter background. I cut it into a thin strip and saved the other strips for another card. I thought it'd be fun to add some red glitter to our background here, and so I used these Your Next Stamp gumdrops. These are really fun because they have shine to them and a bit of dimension, but they're not too bulky, and they come in a lot of different colors and finishes. These red glitter ones were perfect for this background. For the note card itself, I wanted to use an embossing folder for some fun texture. I'm using this Sunny Studio Buffalo Plaid embossing folder. I'm just putting half of my note card into it, and then I'll run it through my die cut machine. Embossing folders work with pretty much every die cut machine. You just need to check your instruction manual to see what sandwich to use. I thought this buffalo plaid on the white note card would just add a little interest to the background. Now on our glitter piece, I did mat it with white cardstock, and now I'm putting double-sided tape on the back of it, so it would have a bit of dimension on our card. So the completed card is 4 1/4 by 5.5. I again added a stacked Hello white die cut right onto our glitter piece. And then I did add a stamped sentiment underneath it that says Merry Christmas that I stamped with red ink. I think this is one of my favorite designs for using this glitter paper that we created because it doesn't cover the entire card, but it keeps it right focused in the center where the sentiment is. And notice there's no glittery mess with this. The glitter doesn't rub off. In fact, I'll rub it here with my finger and you'll see that nothing comes off onto my finger. It stays put because I used a fine glitter with that strong double-sided adhesive. By the way, the Merry Christmas that I stamped in red is from this older Pretty Pink Posh stamp set called Angel Friends, and I've used this before in a video. I'll link to it here. So I had a strip left over from that background, and I decided to use it for this card, which actually came together very quickly. This is the Pretty Pink Posh Stitched Poinsettia die set. It's a great layering die set, and I thought it would be great for the focal point of a card. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and I again used the Sunny Studio Buffalo Plaid embossing folder. I added our glitter strip there, along with a faux stitched edge that I created with that background die, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. I then added the layer poinsettia in the center, and then used the Pretty Pink Posh Hello Friend die to create the word friend that I added on top. So this just shows a little bit of the glitter paper that we created, but it didn't want it to go to waste. I save all those thin strips for cards like this. Okay, let's go ahead and make a card with the background that we created using the background die. I'm actually going to cut this in half, and I'm only using the outer edges, and I'm actually flipping them so the outer edges are turned and in the inside. So you can see that I did here. I had a leftover strip from the middle that I'll save for something else. I also use a background die just to cut from white cardstock, as you see here. And I'm cutting off the 2 outer edges that have faux stitching on them. I'm putting some double-sided tape on the back of them, and I'll glue them along the edge of our glitter pieces. So basically what I'm doing is creating a faux stitched border piece that'll just give a nice definition to our card. Many background dies like this one have faux stitched edge or a scallop edge, and you can always die cut it and then cut off those edges to create borders. It's just another way to stretch your dies and give it a new look. Okay, so I have these 2 faux stitched borders glued right to the center. So then I have a larger piece of white cardstock that I'll add as a strip over those. I'm stamping Happy Holidays on that with red ink, and that is also from that Pretty Pink Posh Angel Friend stamp set. Before I add this to the card, and after I did my stamping, I decided to run it through that embossing folder to give it texture just for something fun. So I'm adding that piece right to the center of our card, and you can see our faux stitched borders peeking out on the left and right. I then die cut Hello 3 times from white cardstock, and once from red glitter cardstock, and added that to the front of the card. I also added a few flat red gemstones as berries along the glitter paper. So here you can see how I took that background die, gave it a completely different look because of how I kind of chopped it up and rearranged it, used that glitter stencil technique with it. We have our faux stitch borders and our embossing folder down the center. So there's a lot of different textures going on this, but it stays clean and simple because I use simple colors and I have that white strip down the center. And by the way, if you're one of those that's not a fan of glitter, you could do this design with that background die, but just use cardstock die cuts. Okay, let's move on to our next example. This one uses that bold pink and green glitter background that we created. I also used the new Pretty Pink Posh Joy Stamp set. This is a really fun one along with its coordinating die because you could use it for shaker windows or stained glass effect, but today I'm just using it for simple white die cuts to add to our glitter background. For my card, I decided to white heat emboss that large joy onto white cardstock. So since this is white embossing on white cardstock, it won't show up much in the video or in the photo, but in real life you can see the texture. So I stamped it first with Versamark ink, added Hero Arts white embossing powder, and heat set it. Now once this was cool, I put it back into my MISTI stamping tool, and I stamped the word joy once again with Versamark ink in the exact same spot. So I'm basically stamping on top of the embossing powder we've already done. I'll again add white embossing powder and heat set it again. This allows me to have a more raised effect so that that stamping stands out more against that white cardstock. Double embossing like this is a great way to add more texture and also to give a little more definition to your embossing. Next, I use the coordinating die to go ahead and cut out the word joy. And then I use the coordinating die to cut out 3 more joys. And I glued them behind our embossed one for dimension. I'm now using liquid adhesive to add these to the front of the card. Again, it does have that white heat embossing on there, which matches nicely with the background. It's just hard to see in the video. I then use pink ink to stamp the sentiment that says, "Wishing you a blessed holiday season," and added that right across. And that is from the same Joy stamp set. Next, from the coordinating die set, I cut these little holly leaves from green cardstock. And I'm using my scoring tool to do little score lines down the center. It's just a nice way to give a little definition to the holly leaves and add a bit of texture and a little bit of dimension. So I glued those leaves around the card using Gina K Connect liquid adhesive, and I also added a few light pink gemstones. So here you can see that bold glitter background and all the shine that you get from it, and that double heat embossed layer that's on that white. So you can really see it in real life. It's just beautiful and adds a bit of interest to those simple letters. Okay, I have one more example to share with you. This one uses that snowflake background. I kept this one very simple and used the new Pretty Pink Posh Holiday Signs stamp set. I thought this one was really fun because you have all the different critters and the sign, and you can put any sentiment that you want to inside. Okay, so I went ahead and off screen stamped the little penguin with the little sentiment and colored it quickly with markers, nothing fancy, and then used the coordinating die to cut it out. I added our glitter background to the bottom of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and also put a black cardstock strip along the top just for a bit of definition. Finally, I added the penguin with some foam tape and a few green gemstones to the background for some added sparkle, and also to pull in the green that's on his hat into the background. Okay, so there you have a fun way to use your glitter along with your stencils to create really cool backgrounds. And by the way, if you don't want to use glitter, you can actually use embossing powder for this too. Okay, so if you are interested in the different things that I used today, I have them linked below in my description, and I have a couple other videos that I mentioned throughout this video here in the middle. I'm appreciative of the time that you've spent with me today. I hope you have a good week, and I'll be back soon with another video.